Gurdjieff, or if you belong to the inner circle, Gurdjieff, is one of the better known mystics of the 20th century. He, well, whether you call him a mystic or a philosopher or a teacher of sacred dances, well, it really doesn't matter. He did all of those things. He wrote his own tome, a huge work called Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. Except to the few who believe that they understand it, it's pretty well indecipherable. He said he intended to bury the bone deep. Whether there's any bone there at all is a question, or is a matter for debate. Certainly I've spoken to people fairly high up in the Gurdjieff hierarchy, if you believe in such a thing. And they, some of them at least, have said that Beelzebub's Tales was just a huge distraction. Well, that doesn't stop quite a few people writing books about Beelzebub's Tales and claiming to have the key to understanding it. Sophia Wellbeloved is a person who's written what is effectively like a reference dictionary for Beelzebub's Tales, and various other people have done the same. Now, Gurdjieff relied to a large extent on other people. P.D. Ouspensky wrote In Search of the Miraculous, which, as far as making sense of Gurdjieff is concerned, is probably the most lucid account of what he was teaching. But I've known people who knew Gurdjieff, and there's a strange dynamic takes place. The nearer people were to Gurdjieff, the more they saw him as, essentially an ordinary man who'd achieved some extraordinary things. But none of them took what he said as gospel. None of them followed blindly what he said. Most of them believed that he made mistakes. In other words, human characteristics. These people that knew Gurdjieff loved him dearly, but they weren't sycophants and people who effectively took their brains out when they dealt with Gurdjieff or talked about Gurdjieff. They retained their common sense and their critical faculties. On the other hand, the further you get away from Gurdjieff in terms of the generations of people who write about him, so people who've possibly never even been involved with a genuine school involved in the Gurdjieff work, so the writing becomes more fantastic, and the attitude of these people becomes more sycophantic, more naive, more suggestible of what Gurdjieff was and what he achieved. Now, he has himself to blame for this in some respects. He certainly portrayed an image of a man of the East with mystical capabilities or mystical properties. And people bought into that very readily because it was attractive. The idea that some man possessed some magical knowledge that would bring them salvation. And Gurdjieff was not shy about offering salvation. His claim was that the ordinary man has no soul, is not immortal, and when he dies, or when his or her body dies, then that's the end of the matter. That person disappears from existence completely. And he offered methods and techniques for, to use his words, coating higher bodies. Bodies that had some measure of immortality. And most people are concerned with their mortality. And that's worth investigating in itself. Why would someone be concerned about their mortality? And Gurdjieff offered some magical means of avoiding this state of affairs. Having been involved with several Gurdjieff schools and known people who knew Gurdjieff, you can take it that many of the people involved in these things actually don't have a clue what they're doing. In fact, the whole thing becomes heavily corrupted. And it becomes corrupted because actually, as to use Gurdjieff's own words, he left a right mess. And he probably left a right mess deliberately, because he knew that people would try and create some kind of religion out of what he'd done. And indeed, that is the case. I remember speaking with someone who is, well, you know, people in various Gurdjieff societies have hierarchies. And some of the people in these hierarchies are quite jealous of those positions. Anyway, this particular character, I suggested to him that I'd been told by somebody who knew Gurdjieff that really Gurdjieff was an ordinary man, at which point he sort of blew a fuse and became extremely aggravated. And it shocked me to some extent to see such a reaction. If Gurdjieff wasn't an ordinary man, then what did he think he was? And again, Gurdjieff has himself to blame for this, for portraying himself as a man who was possibly as fully developed as a man can be. I don't know if that's true or not, having been involved with this for many, many years. I keep an open mind, because how can I possibly know what Gurdjieff was and what he wasn't? And I can give anybody listening to this a piece of advice. Whatever you do, if you get involved with the Gurdjieff movement, do not lose your common sense and critical facilities, or your critical faculties. Because if you do, then you will get lost in a sea of confusion and superstition, and it will probably be quite damaging for you. I currently know a young man, he's only 24 years old, who got hold of Gurdjieff. And as many people do when they get hold of, well, in his case, In Search of the Miraculous, read it and believe that they found the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And he realized within a year or two that actually all this reading and studying had actually got him nowhere. Well, not only got him nowhere, it actually left him more confused. And this is very common. Certainly that was the case for me. I got hold of Beelzebub's Tales when I was around 20 years old, and I read it for about 10 years and understood almost nothing. I actually used to quite enjoy reading it because Gurdjieff has a very nice way of talking effectively in that book. But in terms of helping me with life, then no, I got nothing from it. And I got nothing from it because basically it's a whole pile of confused gobbledygook. Again, I say there are people who believe that they can make sense of it. Well, Maybe they can. I'm not one to judge what they can do. But the average experience of people reading Beelzebub's tales is that it causes confusion. And confusion is not a good thing. So, what to do? Well, one of the people I knew who knew Gurdjieff told me that if a Zen school had been available at that time, that is the way this person would have gone. And this person lived with Gurdjieff for several years. Now that's quite something, isn't it? And in actual fact, I suggested that Beelzebub's Tales was nothing other than a large Zen koan, and this person didn't disagree. Now, they may have been agreeing with me just for the sake of it. I don't know. Again, once you get involved with some of these people, they play games. I've met numerous people in the Gurdjieff work who like to pretend they can emulate Gurdjieff. Apparently one of his gifts was that he could become incredibly angry and scream and shout and yet remain calm inside. Well, good for him. I'm sure that the people that he directed that at were not entirely, how can I put it, they were not improved by that. And so I've met people at various levels in the Gurdjieff work who have been very keen to tell me they can do the same thing. As soon as they tell me that, I immediately lose respect for them and move on. And in fact, for me now, the Gurdjieff work is sort of like an afterglow. There are things in there that are useful. I mean, I'm not saying there's nothing in there that's useful. But the thing that I did, and that I warn other people not to do, is I did lose my common sense. And I entertained ideas and approaches to life that were quite damaging. And this is very common. Again, you may or may not know that a substantial number of people who followed Gurdjieff, who actually knew him and worked with him, became insane. I mentioned this to some people fairly high in the hierarchy, and they just said, well, they were going to go insane anyway. Well, they don't know that, and it seemed like a fairly harsh thing to say of these people. So, to summarize, if you get involved in the Gurdjieff work, keep your intelligence. Question everything that's said to you. If it doesn't make sense, dismiss it. Don't believe that the person who is telling you whatever they're telling you knows more than you do. They probably don't. They're probably just assuming some position of authority because they've either been given it by somebody who doesn't really have authority, or they've assumed it because they just want to make a name for themselves. You know, I've known a lot of people in the Gurdjieff work who want to be famous, and they see it as a way of becoming famous. So, look after yourself. Keep your reason. Keep your reasoning faculty alive and well. And do not just blindly accept what is being offered. Whether you will find anything of value in the Gurdjieff work, well, it's open for debate. There are things in there that are useful, but you'll have to find them for yourself. Anyway, good luck if that's the way you go.